My name's David, and the Chronological Bible Reading for August 25th is Lamentations, chapters 1 through 3, verse 36. Imagine how Jeremiah must have felt as the author of this book, watching the city he loved completely be demolished. Everyone who lived there, for the most part, was either killed or exiled to Babylon. The city walls were torn down. The temple of Yahweh was ransacked, looted. The great houses of all of the nobles and all of the rich people of the city were burned. And there was no one left except for the poorest of the poor, who were now managing the farms and the gardens. Everything that made Jerusalem a wonderful place to visit had been taken away at this point. This was where God's glory dwelled. But God removed his glory from that place because of the sin of the people. How she sits alone, the city once crowded with people, Jeremiah writes in chapter 1. She who was great among the nations has become like a widow. She weeps bitterly during the night with tears on her cheeks. There is no one to offer her comfort, not one from all of her lovers, which are idols. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. The enemy will lure you. He knows what it is that you desire in your heart, and he will continually distract you with counterfeits to placate you, to keep you bound. And then when you come to the end of yourself, he will turn on you and blame you and say, it's your fault. You deserve this. The things that you have desired were wrong. But the truth is, the things that you desire, fulfillment, relationship, even wealth, is not wrong. In verse 5, her adversaries have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease, for Yahweh has made her suffer because of her many transgressions. There is no escaping this world without suffering. We all will go through it. God pours out wrath on sinners because sinners hurt other people, and sinners neglect to give God his proper place. All of the people who lived in Jerusalem are experiencing the pain of God's wrath and punishment coming upon them and upon their city because of the choices they've made. And it's sad to watch. So as Jeremiah is writing these things, he is lamenting. It's breaking his heart. He genuinely loved God's people. And that is one of the marks of a true prophet and servant of the Most High God. A love for all people, loving them enough to tell them the truth, even when the truth is so unpleasant and you know they are going to hate you because you're speaking it to them. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Jeremiah laid down his life going before kings and royals and priests, standing in the temple square, proclaiming the truth that nobody wanted to hear. Surely Jeremiah was alone much of his life, neglected and rejected, persecuted, and yet he had fellowship with God. In much of these writings, we see the personification of the city of Jerusalem, and the book is written in parts from the city's perspective. In verse 18, Yahweh is just, for I have rebelled against his command. Listen, all you people, look at my pain. My young women and young men have gone into captivity. I am churning within. My heart is broken, for I have been very rebellious. There comes a point when the sinner who is being disciplined by God begins to understand that it was necessary for that discipline. The Father doesn't enjoy it, but it's really his love and kindness that brings it about to turn the heart of the wayward child. Then that child in verse 22 begins to look at the other people around and saying, why aren't you disciplining them? Let all their wickedness come before you and deal with them the way you've dealt with me. And we shouldn't be worried or focused on the people around us. We need to be focused on who God is and who we are in relationship to him. In chapter 2, verse 11, Jeremiah says, my eyes are worn out from weeping. Certainly it is difficult to watch the city you love endure the discipline of the Most High God. And in verse 14, what brought about that discipline? Your prophets saw visions for you that were empty and deceptive. They did not reveal your iniquity and so restore your fortunes. Beware of the prophets who only prophesy good things and don't talk about your need to repent. Jerusalem got to this place because they rejected prophets like Jeremiah. They persecuted him and threw him into cisterns. But they propped up for themselves prophets who would tickle their ears with things that they wanted to hear. We see this in much of the church world today in 2024. And in chapter 3, we begin to see the turning point. In verse 18, my future is lost. Have you ever felt like your life was over? Yet in verse 21, I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of Yahweh's faithful love, we do not perish, for his mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Yahweh is my portion. Therefore I will put my hope in him. Finally, in the midst of the suffering, the one undergoing this discipline begins to stop looking at their own needs and stop looking at the sinners going free around them, and they're starting to understand that nothing else really matters except for relationship with the Most High God. And if you have him in your heart and you know that you are in his heart, nothing else really matters. Take my future, take my city and my home. I have nothing else, God, but as long as I have you, nothing else matters. In verse 31, for the Lord will not reject us forever. Even if he causes suffering, he will show compassion. He does not enjoy bringing affliction or suffering on mankind. Faith is understanding that God is always there. And a lot of times we will reap the consequences of our own actions. His grace will often protect us when we make foolish decisions. But when we harden our hearts against him, or when we do things despite having a check in our spirit knowing that we should not do those things, bad things will happen to us. God allows it, but it's not his fault when bad things happen to us. It's a result of our own immaturity or disobedience caused by a lack of faith. The answer to it all is to trust him. And when you really begin to understand that, it will give you the grace to truly rejoice in your trials. May God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.